She thought she was just covering a spill. Then the Mafia boss dragged her into the shadows and whispered, "You're not walking away. You're becoming mine." One fake relationship to save her life. And her first move in public leaves the entire criminal underworld frozen, staring at her like she just detonated a bomb. But what she does next? It forces the most feared men in the city to choose, kill her or follow her. And when she turns to answer their stunned silence, her voice sparks a war no one saw coming. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. Melanie Noyes, a Latina waitress, moved through the opulent dining room of La Rosa Bianca. She was exhausted, her feet aching from walking back and forth for hours, but she knew she couldn't stop. The money she earned here, every last dollar, was essential to support her sick mother and younger brother. This job, at this high-end restaurant, was their lifeline. Meanwhile, Michael Gambino sat at a private VIP table in the back, moving as if he owned the place, which, secretly, he did. He was used to being the center of attention, though tonight he was irritated. For him, these dinners were pure theater. His slicked-back dark hair and the intricate dark tattoos creeping up his neck and covering the backs of his hands were a clear warning to everyone who saw him. He had already greeted the right people, exchanged calculated nods, and listened to stories that didn't interest him. All he wanted now was an excuse to leave. As Michael stood, distracted by a thought, Melanie was coming from the other direction, her focus on a heavy, silver tray of red wine. She didn't notice him move, and they collided. A full glass of $500 Cabernet spilled all over the front of his crisp, black shirt. From the impact, Melanie took a step back, startled, as the tray she was carrying fell from her hands, scattering glasses and shards across the marble floor. The dining room fell silent. Every musician stopped. Every conversation died. Melanie's breath hitched, the sound echoing in the sudden, terrible quiet. "What the hell?" Michael hissed, his voice low and dangerous as he glared at the dark red stain spreading across his chest. Melanie stammered, I'm so sorry, sir, Trying to apologize, her heart pounding in her chest. She fumbled with a white napkin, her hand shaking as she went to blot the stain, but stopped, realizing that touching him was an even worse idea. Before she could form another word, they heard low chuckles from a nearby table. The Moretti associates, a rival capo, Leo Moretti, leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He was watching the scene with open amusement, clearly enjoying the sight of the untouchable Michael Gambino being disrespected by a server. Michael saw it. His eyes narrowed. "Someone's watching," he murmured, more to himself than to her. The laughter was a sign of disrespect, a test of his power. Letting a waitress spill on him and walk away made him look weak. Killing her for it, right here, would make him look impulsive and sloppy. With no time to think, Michael's hand shot out and grabbed Melanie hard by the arm. His grip was like steel. Melanie let out a small gasp as he dragged her from the center of the room, his long strides forcing her to almost run to keep up. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed forward. He opened a side door leading to a small, dark storage alcove meant for server stations, pushed her inside, and shut the door firmly behind them. In the sudden, pitch-black silence, Melanie tried to catch her breath, her back pressed against a wall of metal shelves. She could smell the wine on his shirt, mixed with an expensive, spicy cologne. She looked up at Michael. He stood inches from her, a towering shadow against the thin line of light from the door. His face was a mask of cold fury, his intense stare pinning her in place. "What are you doing?" she finally whispered, her tone more exasperated than she intended. "Shutting down a problem," he replied curtly, his voice a low growl. "You have any idea what you just did?" Before she could answer, they heard the voices. The gossip had already started, muffled through the wood of the door. "Did you see that?" She dumped wine right on him. "And he didn't kill her. Grabbed her, pulled her right into that room. She must be someone close." Melanie's heart, which had been racing, now felt like it had stopped. She looked at Michael in dawning horror. Being alone in a dark room with the most feared man in the city was bad. But she suddenly realized how easily their situation was being misunderstood by the men outside. In Michael Gambino's world, a misunderstanding like this wasn't just embarrassing, it was deadly. If this gives you chills, don't forget to subscribe now. The incident in the alcove ended with Michael stepping out, leaving Melanie to fix herself and return to the floor, but the damage was done. The whispers followed her for the rest of her shift, a wave of fear and suspicion. By morning, the spill had erupted into a full-blown legend within the city's underworld. Melanie Noyes wasn't just a clumsy waitress, she was Michael Gambino's secret, his mistress, the only woman who had ever publicly disrespected him and lived to tell the tale. When Melanie arrived for her shift that afternoon, the change was palpable. Staff who used to share tired jokes with her now avoided her gaze. The restaurant's manager, a man who usually just grunted at her, approached her with a pale, nervous look. "Miss Noyes," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Gambino wants to see you, now." He didn't lead her to his own small, cluttered office. He led her to a private elevator she never knew existed, hidden behind a tapestry of an Italian vineyard. He used a special key, and the elevator ascended smoothly. "He's on the top floor," the manager whispered, refusing to meet her eyes. The doors opened not to a restaurant floor, but to a breathtaking penthouse office. Dark mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single block of black marble. And behind it sat Michael Gambino. He wasn't in his black shirt from last night. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, looking every bit the ruthless CEO he was. "Close the door, Melanie," he said. His voice was calm, but it held an authority that rooted her to the spot. She did, her hands shaking. "Mr. Gambino, about last night. I am so sorry. I'll pay for the shirt. You think this is about a shirt?" He cut her off, his tone laced with cold amusement. "That spill, as you call it, has caused a problem. The Moretti family was at the next table. They saw everything." Melanie's blood ran cold. She knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. "They saw my tolerance of your little accident," Michael continued, steepling his fingers. "In their world, a man who lets someone disrespect him like that is weak. Unless that someone isn't just someone." He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "The rumors are that you're my mistress, my girlfriend, my weakness." He said the word like it tasted vile. "I'll quit," Melanie blurted out, desperation rising. "I'll leave the city. I'll sign something. I'll never tell anyone I even met you." Too late. He turned to face her, his eyes pinning her. "Your story is already out. And I have a problem. The Morettis and I are in the middle of a delicate negotiation for an alliance. They are old-fashioned. They value men with stable, traditional family lives." Melanie's mind raced, but she couldn't see where this was going. I don't understand." "It's simple." He walked toward her, and she had to fight the urge to shrink back. "The narrative is already written. You are the woman I am close to. If I fire you, or if you disappear, it signals to the Morettis that you were a liability, that I'm reckless. It kills the deal." He stopped just a few feet from her. "So, you are going to help me control the narrative. You are going to pretend to be my girlfriend." The words hit her like a slap. "What? No, I can't. I'm a waitress. I have a family, a sick mother. I can't be involved in this." "You're already involved," he snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You were involved the moment you dropped that tray. Right now, you have two options. 1, you refuse, you walk out that door, and you and your little family are a loose end, a target for every rival I have, including the Morettis, who might want to ask you questions about my weakness." Her breath caught in her throat. He was threatening her family. "Or," he continued, his voice softening just enough to be even more terrifying, "there's option 2. You play the part. You stand by my side. You become the public face of my stable life. And in return, you, your mother, and your brother are under my protection. Untouchable." Tears of pure, blinding terror welled in Melanie's eyes. This wasn't a choice. It was a cage. He was offering her protection from a danger he himself had just created. "You will do this," he stated. It wasn't a question. Melanie looked at the cold, calculating man in front of her. She thought of her mother's medical bills. She thought of her brother's future. Swallowing the sob that threatened to choke her, she gave a single, terrified nod. If you're still watching without subscribing, imagine Melanie finding out you enjoyed her suffering for free. Don't be that person. The next 48 hours were a blur. Melanie was moved from her small apartment into a secure, sterile, clean guest room in Michael's penthouse. She didn't see him. Instead, she was handed over to a woman named Isabella. Isabella was tall, impossibly elegant, and had eyes that missed nothing. She wasn't a stylist. She was a handler. She didn't just bring clothes. She brought armor. "Mr. Gambino's women are not loud," Isabella instructed, her voice crisp as she laid out a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than Melanie's yearly rent. "You do not wear bright colors. You do not wear flashy jewelry. You are a reflection of his taste, and his taste is quiet, expensive. You are an asset, not a distraction." The lessons were grueling. It wasn't just about which fork to use. It was about how to sit straight-backed, but not rigid. How to smile pleasantly, but never too widely. How to listen to the men's conversations without hearing them. "You will be spoken to," Isabella warned, fixing Melanie's hair into a simple, elegant bun that made her look older. "You will not offer opinions. You will not ask about business. If someone asks you a direct question, you will answer with a single polite sentence. And you never, ever, speak for Mr. Gambino. Is that clear?" "Yes," Melanie whispered, feeling like a doll being dressed for a stranger's party. "And your hands," Isabella said, grabbing Melanie's wrist. "Stop fidgeting. You look terrified. You are with him. You have nothing to fear. You must look like you belong." But Melanie was terrified. Tonight was her debut, a formal dinner at an exclusive club, hosted by the Moretti family. When Michael finally appeared, he looked her over, his face impassive. He simply nodded, a silent approval of Isabella's work, and said, "Stay close. Don't talk." The club was all dark wood, cigar smoke, and hushed, powerful voices. Melanie felt like an imposter, a dove in a den of vipers. The Moretti family was there in force. Leo Moretti, the man who had chuckled at her in the restaurant, watched her with a predatory interest as Michael introduced her. "Melanie," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "A pleasure. We were all so intrigued after your dramatic introduction to Michael." To that, Melanie's heart hammered against her ribs, but she remembered Isabella's training. "It's a pleasure to be here, Mr. Moretti." Michael watched, surprised and slightly irritated. She hadn't stammered. She hadn't blushed. She just delivered the line, flat and polite. The tension peaked at dinner. The table was filled with Mafia wives, dripping in understated diamonds, who appraised her with cold, practiced eyes. Melanie kept her gaze on her plate, eating slowly, even though her stomach was in knots. Then, a voice cut across the table. It was Francesca Moretti, Leo's wife. "So, Melanie," she said, her voice deceptively sweet. "Michael is such a private man. We were all so surprised he found someone. Tell me, how did you two even meet?" The table went quiet. It was a test, a direct challenge. They all knew the rumors, and this was a demand for her to prove them. Melanie's mind went blank. She could feel Michael's gaze on her, heavy and cold. He was waiting for her to fail. She lifted her chin, just slightly, and met Francesca's stare. She thought back to that night, the fear, the crash, the way he had grabbed her and dragged her into the dark. She channeled that genuine terror and wrapped it in a different meaning. "It wasn't a gentle meeting," Melanie said, her voice low and steady. "He wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. To be honest, he terrified me." She allowed a small, shaky smile to touch her lips. "But when he looks at you, you feel like you're the only person in the world. It's intense." She then dropped her gaze back to her plate, as if the memory was too intimate to share. A few of the wives smiled, recognizing the description of a powerful, possessive man. Francesca's painted-on smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of respect. Melanie hadn't just answered. She'd painted a picture of a whirlwind, passionate, and slightly dangerous romance, exactly the kind of story that would justify Michael's sudden choice. Melanie chanced a glance at Michael. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, but the irritation was gone. It was replaced by something else, something she couldn't name. He had expected a liability. Instead, she had just saved him, and he realized, with a jolt of discomfort, that Melanie Noyes might be far more valuable than he ever intended. The dinner with the Morettis set a new precedent. Melanie was no longer just the waitress incident. She was Michael's woman. Her success had solidified her role, and Michael began taking her everywhere. Charity galas, tense restaurant meetings, even Sunday services that felt more like power gatherings than worship. But Melanie didn't play the part like the other Mafia wives. They were brittle and sharp, draped in designer labels and wearing practiced, bored expressions. They competed with each other in whispers. Melanie was quiet, not out of boredom, but out of observation. She was authentic. At a tense backyard party, she found herself sitting with Francesca Moretti. The older woman was watching her son, who was arguing heatedly with another young, hot-headed associate. "He'll get himself killed," Francesca murmured, her voice tight with a rare, genuine fear. "He's just like his father. All pride, no sense." Melanie didn't offer advice. She simply said, "He must love you very much, to try so hard to impress you." Francesca looked at her, startled. The other wives would have agreed he was reckless. Melanie saw the motive underneath. "Yes," Francesca said slowly. "He does." A silent bond formed. The women, who had initially seen her as a curiosity, began to talk to her. They saw her as safe. She didn't gossip. She didn't jockey for position. She just listened. This new influence began to ripple. At one dinner, two of Michael's capos were arguing over territory, their voices rising. Before Michael could slam his fist on the table, Melanie quietly spoke up. "Michael," she said, touching his arm lightly, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Isabella was asking if you preferred the red or the white wine for the upcoming charity event." The simple domestic question shattered the tension. The capos fell silent, embarrassed to be arguing so hotly in front of her. Michael stared at her, then answered, "The red." The crisis was averted, not with a threat, but with a distraction. Michael watched all of this with a growing, unsettling conflict. He had designed this to be a performance, with her as his silent prop. But she wasn't a prop. She was influential. His men, who had only ever responded to fear, were starting to act with a strange, grudging respect around her. Her presence was softening his image, and it was earning him a type of loyalty he'd never achieved with his fists. He felt a flicker of admiration, quickly smothered by irritation. He was a king, and his pawn was suddenly, inexplicably, changing the rules of the board. He found himself noticing her. He'd had her belongings moved from her apartment. He saw her one night, standing in her room, holding a framed photo of her mother and brother. He felt nothing, he told himself. But he found himself saying, "Your mother's new nurse starts today. She's the best oncologist in the state." Melanie looked at him, shocked by the information. "Thank you. I expect my assets to be focused," he replied, turning away. "Your family being sick is a distraction." It was a cold, brutal statement, but it was also the first time he had acknowledged her life outside of him. It was a crack in the armor, however small. Later that week, she was walking toward his office to tell him she was ready for another evening event. She heard raised voices from inside and froze. It was Leo Moretti. "Letting her get too comfortable, Michael. The men listen to her. The women listen to her. She's a waitress. You put her back in her place, or I will." Melanie's stomach clenched. She expected Michael to agree, to dismiss her as a tool. The silence that followed was heavy. Then came Michael's voice. Not loud, but deadly. "She is mine," he said, the words sharp as glass. "She is exactly where I placed her. And if I hear that you or any of your men show her anything less than the respect you show me, you'll answer for it. Am I clear?" "She's a liability," Leo pressed. "She's an asset," Michael countered, his voice final. "And you will treat her as such. Now get out." Melanie pressed her back against the hallway wall, her heart hammering. He hadn't defended her. He had defended his property. But it was a defense nonetheless. He was protecting her. And that, she realized, made him more complicated and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. A week passed. The incident with Leo Moretti cemented Melanie's status. She was no longer a temporary guest in Michael's penthouse. She was an accepted fixture, a silent, elegant shadow at his side. The staff, who had once ignored her, now treated her with a deferential fear. She had her own room, a beautiful, sterile cage. The words she'd overheard, "She's an asset, she is mine," haunted her. He was protecting her, yes, but only as one would protect a valuable painting or a prized racehorse. The cold, possessive nature of it settled in her bones, but it also made her bolder. If she was a valuable asset, she was, for the moment, safe from being discarded. Michael was out for the day, a rare, high-stakes meeting he'd insisted on taking alone. Melanie was restless. Isabella had given her a list of approved activities: reading, language lessons, fittings, but she found herself wandering the vast, quiet penthouse. She was drawn, inexplicably, to his study, the one room that was always locked. Today, a cleaner had just finished inside. The door was left slightly ajar. Her heart knocked against her ribs. This was his inner sanctum, a place she was clearly, if unspokenly, forbidden from. She pushed the door. It swung open silently. It was just an office, but more personal than the one downstairs. Dark wood, the scent of old leather and whiskey, and a wall of books. She wasn't looking for anything, just curious. What kind of man lived this life? On a side table, away from his main desk, a thick, leather-bound ledger lay open. It looked old. Beside it were several black-and-white photographs, as if he'd been reviewing old acquisitions. Curiosity pulled her closer. They were photos of old city storefronts, dated from the late 90s. And then she saw it. A name printed neatly below one of the photos. Noyes, Imports. Her blood turned to ice. She snatched the photo. It was her father's shop, the one he had poured his entire life into. But in the photo, the windows were shattered. Dark spray paint defaced the brick. A red symbol was painted on the door, a symbol she now recognized as the Gambino family crest. The memory hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't 24 anymore. She was 14. The sound of her mother screaming, the acrid smell of smoke. Her father, a proud, strong man, sitting at their small kitchen table, his head in his hands, utterly broken. He'd talked in whispers about protection money, about thugs who wanted to buy him out for pennies. He had refused. Weeks later, the accident started. Deliveries smashed, windows broken, then the fire. The insurance company called it faulty wiring, but her father knew. They did this, he'd whispered, his face gray with defeat. The debts piled up. The stress crushed his heart. He died of a massive coronary 6 months later. The doctors called it stress. Melanie called it murder. Her shaking hands went to the ledger. It wasn't a financial book. It was a list of businesses. And next to Noyes Imports was a single, chilling notation in neat cursive. Refused. Finalized. MG Sr. MG Sr. Michael Gambino. Senior Michael's father. It was them. It had always been them. The Gambino crime family. The organization she was now helping to legitimize. The man whose protection she was under. His family was responsible for her father's death, for the ruin of her family, for every single nightmarish struggle that had forced her into waitressing in the first place. A strangled sob tore from her throat. She stumbled back, dropping the photo as if it had burned her. Every kind word, every small crack in his armor, every gesture, it was all a lie. His defense of her to Leo Moretti wasn't protection. It was a predator guarding his kill. She fled to her room, locking the door, her body shaking so violently she could barely stand. She slid to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, the tears coming in silent, agonizing waves. He was a monster. His father was a monster. The entire family was built on the bones of people like her father. Her first instinct was to run, to pack her few belongings and never look back. But she stopped, her breath catching. Where would she go? He'd find her. They'd be loose ends. A new feeling, cold and hard as steel, began to form beneath the grief. Running was what they expected. Running was what her father had been forced to do. No, she wiped her tears, her hands balling into fists. She would stay. She would play the part of the perfect, devoted girlfriend. She would stay so close that she could see every card he held, and she would find out exactly what Michael knew. And then, she would burn his entire world to the ground. She waited. The cold, hard resolve in her chest settled into a glacial stillness. Hours passed. The grief had burned itself out, leaving behind a focused, crystalline rage. She sat in her room, a ghost in a gilded cage, until she heard the sound of the penthouse door opening, his heavy footsteps crossing the marble floor. He was in the main living area, pouring a drink, his back to the room. He didn't hear her approach. "I was in your study." Her voice, quiet and cold, cut through the silence. Michael tensed, his hand freezing midair. He turned slowly. His face was a mask of controlled annoyance. "I don't allow guests in my study." "I know." She walked forward into the light, holding the small black and white photograph. "I found this." He looked at the photo, then at her. His expression didn't change. Old business. Nothing that concerns you. Nothing that concerns me? A sound, half laugh, half sob, escaped her. Noise imports. That was my father's shop. He went utterly still. The mask didn't just crack, it vanished. He stared at her, his eyes searching hers, as if seeing her for the first time. The blood drained from his face. What did you say? Noise imports, she repeated, her voice shaking but gaining strength. That was my family. The business. Your father. She held up the ledger she'd also taken. The business your father finalized. The one he destroyed. He didn't speak. The silence was his confession. He was a good man, she cried, the tears she'd sworn off returning with a vengeance. He worked his entire life for that shop. Your family. You came in, you demanded, and he said no. And for that, you burned him to the ground. She was trembling now, the photograph crushed in her fist. He died 6 months later. A heart attack, the doctors said. But it wasn't. It was this. It was you. Your family murdered him. Michael looked away, turning his back on her to face the wall of glass overlooking the city. He said nothing for a full minute, and the silence was an agony. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The cold authority, the Mafia mask, was gone. It was rough, quiet, and haunted. I was 20 years old. He didn't turn around. I had just been brought into the organization. My father. He saw the city as a chessboard. Your father's shop was a square he wanted, and he didn't care about the pawn standing on it. I argued against it, he said, his voice so low she barely heard him. What? I argued against it, he repeated, louder this time, a trace of old anger in his voice. I told him it was sloppy, that your father was respected in that neighborhood, that it was bad for business, that it would draw attention we didn't need. I tried to stop it. He finally turned to face her. His eyes were dark, not with anger, but with a bone-deep weariness. My father looked at me and said I was soft. He said I didn't have the stomach for what it took to run the family. He ordered the attack not just to get the property, but to teach me a lesson, to show me that sentiment was a weakness we couldn't afford. He took a step toward her. I was overruled. If I had pressed it, if I had gone against his public order, he would have had me killed for insubordination. I had no power. I had no choice. It was the first time she had ever seen him speak without a script. The first time she had seen the man, not the Mafia boss, and it was emotional warfare. Everything in her screamed to hate him. He was a Gambino. He stood by and watched as his father destroyed her family. He benefited from it. He was sitting in this penthouse built on her father's grave. But she also saw the 20-year-old son, trapped by a monstrous father, forced to swallow a poison that had clearly been festering in him for years. Was this the truth? Or was it just another, more masterful manipulation? A silver-tongued devil giving her exactly the excuse she needed to stay, to soften, to forgive? She stared at him, her heart at war with her mind. He was a monster. He was a victim. He was a liar. He was the only person who had ever told her the truth. Melanie said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just held his gaze, her expression unreadable. She vowed internally, with a cold, terrifying certainty, that she would find out. If this was a performance, if he was lying to her to save his own skin, she would no longer just burn his world down. She would stand and watch the ashes grow cold. The emotional warfare of Michael's confession settled into a fragile, dangerous truce. Melanie played her part, standing by his side at dinners and events, but a new, glacial stillness surrounded her. She was respectful, attentive, and utterly unreadable. Michael, in turn, watched her. He had exposed a genuine weakness, a truth from his past, and now he seemed to be waiting to see if she would use it as a weapon. The distance between them, even when she was standing right next to him, grew vast and cold. This new, cold confidence, however, made her more intriguing to the outside world. She was no longer just the pretty, terrified waitress. She was the woman who had faced the devil and remained standing. The seed of betrayal was planted on a Tuesday. Melanie was at a high-end salon, one of Isabella's approved outings. As she sat under a dryer, a man in an impeccably tailored suit sat in the chair beside her. He didn't look like one of Michael's men. "Miss Noyes," he said, his voice low, not even looking at her. "I'm Alessandro Vescovi. I'm legal counsel for several prominent families." Melanie's entire body went on high alert. You're a very intelligent woman, Vescovi continued, flipping through a magazine. And you are being played by a master. I don't know what you're talking about. Michael's confession about his father? About trying to stop the attack on your family? He let out a quiet, mirthless laugh. It was a beautiful performance, but it was a lie. Melanie's heart hammered. He's lying? Not entirely. That's his gift. He wraps his lies in just enough truth to make them palatable. He wanted you to find that ledger, Miss Noyes. He knew you were wandering the penthouse. He left that door unlocked for you. Why? She whispered, horrified. He needed you to confront him. He needed to give you that story, because he's using you as a pawn to manipulate the Moretti alliance. He needed your loyalty to be genuine. He needed you to believe he's a performer, a different kind of boss. He's not changing the family for you. He's using your sympathy to cement his power. Once the Moretti deal is signed, you, my dear, will be a loose end. The lawyer stood, placing a small, blank business card on the table beside her. He's still the man who watched his father destroy your family and did nothing. Don't ever forget that. He left. The hum of the hairdryer was deafening. Vescovi's words shattered her. Was Michael a victim, or was he a sociopath who had weaponized her own trauma against her? The doubt was a poison. She couldn't trust Vescovi. He was a rival, but she couldn't trust Michael either. She was truly, completely alone. From that moment, Melanie's mission changed. She was no longer just seeking truth. She was gathering ammunition. She started with the Mafia wives. She sought out Francesca Moretti, using the trust she'd built. You're so respected, Francesca, she'd say over coffee. I admire how you handle these powerful men. Michael's father. Was he truly as ruthless as they say? Francesca, flattered, would talk. She'd paint a picture of a brutal, paranoid man, and in doing so, reveal the old wounds and factions within the Gambino family. Melanie also started talking to the invisible people, the drivers, the chefs, the penthouse staff. They saw everything. They knew who Michael met with after the official meetings. They knew who truly hated the old guard. She became a quiet force. Respected, trusted, and deeply strategic. Michael's enemies, like Leo Moretti, saw this. They began to use her to needle him, paying her compliments in public, testing Michael's control. She's a smart one, Michael, Leo would say with a grin. You're lucky she's so loyal. Michael felt her growing influence, and he felt her distance. The Cold War in the penthouse escalated. One night, he cornered her by the window. You're spending a lot of time with Francesca Moretti, he said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. She's been very kind, Melanie replied, her face a perfect, polite mask. I'm just trying to learn the rules. Don't learn them too well, he warned, his eyes searching hers for a flicker of the woman he'd confessed to. He found nothing. Just remember who you belong to, Melanie. She looked up at him, her gaze as cold and clear as his. I remember. Every single day. He didn't know if that was a promise or a threat. If you haven't subscribed by now, imagine missing the moment Melanie turns the Mafia against Michael. Subscribe now. The ride to the Moretti family estate was suffocatingly silent. The Cold War between Melanie and Michael had reached a new, freezing peak. Since Vescovi's poisonous words, Melanie had been a perfect porcelain doll, smiling at all the right times and saying all the right things, all while a core of pure ice formed in her heart. Michael watched her, his gaze heavy and calculating. He didn't trust this new, flawless version of her. The car, a black, armored sedan, hummed through the iron gates of the Moretti compound. Tonight, Michael said, his voice flat, not looking at her. They are expecting an announcement. After dinner, I will make a toast. I will propose. You will accept. Melanie's blood ran cold. This was it. The culmination of the entire charade. Vescovi's warning echoed in her ears. Once the deal is signed, you're a loose end. This proposal wasn't a promise of a future. It was the signing of her death warrant. She had to play her part to perfection, even if it meant sealing her own fate. If she showed a single crack, a moment of hesitation, the Morettis would smell blood. They would see the lie, and everyone in this car would be dead before morning. I understand, she said, her voice a perfect soft murmur. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face in the dark. He was looking for the terrified waitress. He found, instead, a calm, composed woman who met his gaze steadily. It unnerved him. Good, was all he said, as the car door was opened by a guard. The Moretti mansion was old money, cold and imposing, filled with dark portraits and the scent of cigar smoke and lemon polish. Old man Moretti, the true patriarch, sat at the head of the table. He was a frail-looking man with the eyes of a hawk. Leo, his son, sat to his right, a smug, predatory grin fixed on his face. The dinner was a minefield of coded language. Melanie, Francesca, Leo's wife, said, smiling warmly, "You look radiant, but pale. Are you nervous? It's a big night, isn't it?" It was a trap, testing her composure. Melanie offered a small, shy smile, the one she'd practiced. "I'm just a little overwhelmed by your family's hospitality, Francesca. It's a lot to take in." Old man Moretti grunted. "Michael, you've done well. This one." He waved a dismissive, bony hand at Melanie. "She's quiet, stable. My son Leo, he prefers his distractions to be louder." It was a clear dig, a test of Michael's control. Melanie could feel Michael's body tense beside her. Before he could respond with a threat, Melanie placed her hand gently on his arm. This simple, public touch was a statement. She looked at old man Moretti, her gaze deferential. "Michael is a very deliberate man," she said, her voice soft but clear. She then turned her head and looked up at Michael, her eyes filled with a look of utter, convincing adoration. "He's taught me that the things you have to wait for are always the most valuable." The table, including Michael, was momentarily stunned. She hadn't just defended him, she had reinforced his image as a man of taste and patience, all while playing the part of the devoted woman. Michael covered her hand with his own, a public gesture of possession that made her skin crawl. "Well said, my dear," Francesca said, her eyes sharp. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of tension. Finally, as the dessert plates were being cleared, Melanie excused herself. She needed a single moment to breathe before the proposal sealed her fate. She was in the grand marble hallway, her hands gripping the railing of the staircase, when Leo Moretti's voice slithered up behind her. "A good performance, truly. You almost had me believing you." Melanie turned slowly. He was leaning against a pillar, swirling a glass of brandy. "Mr. Moretti?" The wide-eyed waitress, the whirlwind romance, the devotion. He took a step closer, his cologne acrid. "It's a beautiful story, but I don't buy it. This was it. The real test. Her life. Michael's life. The entire alliance. It all balanced on this single moment. I heard about your father. Noise imports," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "A real tragedy." Her heart stopped. He knew. Vescovi had told him, or he dug it up himself. "Must be difficult," he continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Preparing to marry into the very family that destroyed yours. Or did Michael leave that part out when he was wooing you?" The trap was sprung. It was perfect. If she admitted she knew, she was a traitor, clearly planning revenge from the inside. The deal would be off, and Michael would be exposed as a fool who had brought a viper into his home. If she pretended she didn't know, she was a naive idiot, and Leo could use the shocking truth to expose Michael as a liar at any moment, destroying his credibility. She had no choice. She had to find a third path. She had to spin the most audacious lie of her life. Melanie looked down, and she let a single, genuine tear of rage and fear well in her eye. She acted. "You think I'm a fool," she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured pain. "I think you're a pawn," he replied, his smile widening. She snapped her head up, and her eyes, wet with tears, were now blazing with a furious, righteous fire. "Did you tell me?" she hissed, jabbing a finger toward him. "No. Did anyone in your family warn me?" "No. The only man who had the courage to tell me the truth was Michael." Leo's smile faltered. This was not the move he'd anticipated. "He told me everything," Melanie lied, her voice gaining a strength she didn't feel. "He told me what his father did. He told me he was there, that he was young, that he tried to stop it. He told me he has lived with that guilt every single day of his life." She was spinning Vescovi's and Michael's own lies into her shield. She was claiming Michael's confession as the very foundation of their bond. She took a step toward Leo, forcing him back. "You see, Mr. Moretti, you think this is a lie because you would never be honest with a woman. You think Michael is like you. He's not. He's trying to clean the organization. He's trying to be a better man than his father. He told me this alliance with your father, was the only way to finally get the power to move past his father's legacy. To make things right. I'm not just marrying him. I'm helping him. He trusts me with his past, and I trust him with my future. Checkmate. Leo was speechless. She had boxed him in completely. If he tried to expose her lie, he would also have to expose that Michael Gambino was a weak reformer who confessed his family's darkest sins to a waitress, an act that would instantly kill the alliance and make Leo the one responsible for the failure. He couldn't prove her story was a lie, because it so perfectly explained everything: why Michael had kept her, why he was marrying her, why she was so loyal. Leo's face darkened with pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew he'd been beaten. "You're a clever little bitch," he snarled. "I just love him," Melanie said, her voice instantly returning to a soft, sweet whisper. She dabbed her eye, brushed past him, and headed back to the dining room. "And I'm so excited for the announcement." She left him in the hallway, disarmed and furious. She had just saved Michael's life, the alliance, and herself, all by pretending to believe the very lie she was now almost certain he'd told. The trap was sprung, and she was the only one who had walked out. The air in the grand dining hall was thick with cigar smoke and self-congratulation. Melanie's victory over Leo Moretti in the hallway had solidified the alliance. Old man Moretti, believing she was a devoted, iron-willed supporter of Michael's reform, was overjoyed. The deal was sealed. Now, all that remained was the public ritual. Old man Moretti stood, his frail hand raised, tapping his glass for silence. "Friends, family, for too long our two houses have stood apart. Tonight, we change that. Tonight we unite not just our businesses, but our blood. Michael, the floor is yours." A wave of applause. This was the moment. Michael stood, looking every inch the powerful, modern boss. He pulled Melanie to her feet beside him, his hand a possessive, heavy weight on the small of her back. The room was watching. He picked up his champagne flute. "For generations," Michael began, his voice resonant, "the Gambino family has valued strength. Today, we forge a new strength, an alliance with the Morettis, sealed by a bond." He turned to Melanie, his eyes holding hers. This was the performance. He was about to propose. She was supposed to blush, to accept, and to become his property, sealing her fate. Vescovi's words echoed. "A loose end." "Before you continue, Michael," Melanie said. Her voice was not loud, but it was so clear, so perfectly calm, that it sliced through the room like a razor. The applause died instantly. Michael froze. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "Melanie," he said, his voice a low private warning. "Sit down." "I can't," she said, pulling away from his grasp to stand alone. She turned to the room, to the sea of shocked and angry faces. Old man Moretti looked apoplectic. Leo was smiling, sensing an implosion. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I must thank you all, especially the Moretti family, for welcoming me. I was told my role here was simple, to be a stable presence, to be a wife." She paused, letting the tension build. "But I cannot be part of an alliance that is built on a rotten foundation." "What is this?" Old man Moretti slammed his fist on the table. "Michael, control your woman." "She's insane," Leo shouted, standing up. "She's a disrespectful." "I'm talking about your corruption, Leo," Melanie said, her voice ringing out. The room went dead silent. Leo's face went white with fury. "I'm talking about the lies told not to our enemies, but to our own families. The lies that have been poisoning us from within for 20 years. Michael's bodyguards started to move toward her, but she held up a hand, and in her hand was a small, folded stack of papers. She'd taken them from Vescovi's unattended briefcase when he'd accidentally met her at the salon. He had planned to betray Michael with them later. He never imagined she would betray them all first. Gasps. Shock. Men rose. Guns were suddenly visible under jackets. "I'm talking about the extortion of businesses like my father's. Noise imports," she said, her voice shaking but full of righteous fire. "An act of the old guard, an act that benefited some, but not all." She looked away from Leo, her gaze sweeping over the other capos. The men who had been loyal for decades, the ones who had complained in whispers to their wives about the Moretti family's greed. "I'm talking about funds siphoned from shared accounts," she said, her voice sharp and precise. "Funds that were supposed to be for all of you. Funds that have been redirected by Leo Moretti and his associates to offshore accounts for their own side deals, all while they tell you it's family business." She was using Vescovi's own evidence against his allies. "She's a liar, a lying whore," Leo roared, pulling his own gun. "Am I?" Melanie's eyes met Francesca's across the room. "Ask your wife, Leo, about the properties in Sicily. Ask her about the secret ledger she's been keeping because she doesn't even trust you." Francesca's face went ashen. She had confessed her fears to Melanie in confidence, and Melanie was now using it as a weapon. This was her move. She wasn't just burning the house down. She was performing a surgical strike. She was protecting the innocent members, the wives, the loyal soldiers, and turning the entire room against the rot, which she had just defined as Leo Moretti and the Old Guard. Everyone looked at Michael. He was the only one who hadn't moved. He stood, frozen, between his future and his past. This was his choice. He could shut her up. He could have his guards drag her out, call her a liar, and save the alliance. He would be secure, but he would be Leo's puppet forever, tied to the very corruption she'd just exposed. He would prove he was just like his father, or worse, a weakling controlled by his enemies. Or he could stand with her. He could shatter the alliance, declare war on the Morettis, and blow his entire world apart. But he would be free. He would be the strong new leader he'd always pretended to be. Melanie had just handed him a dagger and pointed at his biggest enemy. All he had to do was push. An agonizing, silent beat passed. Michael looked at Leo, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked at old man Moretti, whose face was purple. Then he looked at Melanie. She was trembling, but she didn't look away. She was terrified, and she was magnificent. He turned to his own men, who were poised to grab her. "Stand down," he commanded. He turned back to the room. His voice was no longer the smooth, political voice of a CEO. It was the cold, steel voice of a king. "She's right." Chaos erupted. Old man Moretti rose, shaking with fury. You side with this putana? Over our families? Over this agreement?" "I side with my family." Michael's voice cut through the noise. He walked to stand next to Melanie, a united front. "And for too long, men like your son have been a cancer, feeding off our business, hiding behind my father's legacy to cover their own greed and disrespect." He took the papers from Melanie's shaking hand. She didn't just make an accusation. She brought proof. He held them up. "Proof of your betrayal, Leo. You came into my house, you ate my food, and you tried to poison my organization, all while planning to steal from me." It was a suicidal move. He was choosing a waitress over a boss. He was choosing an unproven future over a secure traditional alliance. He was shattering Mafia tradition in front of every leader in the city. He had made his choice, and in doing so, he had just started a war. The chaos of Michael's declaration was immediate. "You're dead!" Leo Moretti roared, his gun finally clearing his jacket. But he was too slow. Michael's own men, loyal to him above all, had their weapons trained on the entire Moretti table. It was a stalemate, seconds from a bloodbath. You idiot," old man Moretti spat, his face a mask of purple rage. He wasn't looking at Melanie, he was looking at Michael. "You would burn your own family." "For her?" "She is my family." Michael's voice was lethally calm. "She proved her loyalty. Your son proved his treachery." He gestured with his chin to the papers in his hand. "The proof is here. We can either settle this with blood, right now, or you can take your cancer out of my house." Old man Moretti stared at the guns. He looked at the other families at the table, who were all watching, silent, making their own calculations. He had lost. By siding with his greedy son over a united, stronger Gambino family, he had lost the room. "This is not over, Michael," the old man hissed. He stood, his old bones creaking. "You have made an enemy of this family. Forever." "You were already my enemy," Michael replied. "You just didn't have the courage to say it. Get out." Leo, his face a grotesque mask of hatred, stared at Melanie. It was a promise of murder. He lowered his gun, but his eyes never left her. The Moretti family, disgraced and outmaneuvered, turned and walked out of the hall, their capos following them. The alliance was not just broken, it was annihilated. War was now a certainty. The doors slammed shut, leaving the room in a stunned, echoing silence. At least a dozen capos and associates from Michael's own family remained, along with Francesca Moretti, who sat frozen in her chair, abandoned by her husband. All eyes went to Michael. He had just bet their entire organization on the word of a waitress. He had declared war on their most powerful rival. He turned, not to his men, but to Melanie. He was expecting something. Fear, relief, for her to run to him. She did none of those things. She was still trembling, but her spine was steel. She addressed the room, her voice clear and strong. "He's right, it's a war. But you need to understand what you're fighting for." The men looked at her, bewildered. This was not protocol. "You can fight for Michael," she continued, "and you'll win. He's strong enough, but you'll just be fighting to put another boss on the throne. You'll be fighting to continue the old way, the way of extortion, the way of protection that preys on people like my father, the way of backstabbing, like Leo Moretti." She looked around the room, meeting their eyes. "That way is weak. It just proved it. It rots from the inside. Leo was stealing from you because that's what the old way taught him. Take what you can. My father was destroyed because that's what the old way taught. Crush the weak." A capo, a respected older man named Paolo, spoke up. "What are you saying, ragazza? What other way is there?" "A better way," Melanie said. She stepped forward, her fear visibly transforming into a fiery, passionate leadership. "You're fighting for a new contract. A family that is loyal down, not just up. An organization that builds empires instead of just extorting storefronts. You want to stop men like Leo? Then you have to stop the system that creates them." It was a revolution. Francesca Moretti, who had been silent, finally stood. "She's right," she said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "Leo, he was bleeding all of you. He was bleeding me. I have his private ledgers, the ones he didn't know about." She looked at Melanie, a new, powerful alliance forming. "I will not lose my children to his war. I will help you. I will help you destroy him." This was the final piece. The room shifted. The men looked from Francesca to Melanie, and then to Michael. Michael had been watching this, his face unreadable. He had started the avalanche, but Melanie was now directing its path. She hadn't just saved him. She had given his entire organization a new purpose. She had taken their rotten, broken-down code and forged it into something new, something stronger. He could have crushed her. He could have stepped in, taken command, and put her back in her place. She had served her purpose. Instead, he watched as she looked at Paolo. "Paolo," she said, "I've seen the books. You know the finances. I need you to lock down every account before the Morettis can touch our shared assets." She turned to another capo. "You, secure our territories. Double the guards. This war will be fast, but it will be bloody. We protect our people first." She was giving orders, and they were listening. Michael made his choice. He stepped back, casually, and leaned against a pillar. He crossed his arms, a king watching his queen take the board. "You heard her," Michael's voice rumbled through the room, a clear, final stamp of approval. "Get it done." The war was brutal, but it was over in 6 weeks. With Francesca's ledgers and Melanie's strategic mind, they didn't just fight the Morettis with guns. They bled them dry in their banks, turned their political allies, and exposed their corruption to their own men. Leo was found dead in a car trunk, a victim of his own betrayed soldiers. Old man Moretti, broken and penniless, was allowed to retire in Sicily. 6 months later, Melanie stood on a familiar sidewalk. The old, broken-down shop that had once been Noya's Imports was completely refurbished. The brick was clean, the windows new. A simple, elegant sign hung above the door. The Noise Community Fund, Rebuilding Businesses, a Gambino Foundation. A black sedan pulled up. Michael got out. He didn't wear the flashy suits of a boss. He looked like a clean, powerful CEO. He stood beside her, looking up at the sign. "A little public, isn't it?" he said, his voice quiet. "The old way was to hide in the shadows," Melanie replied. She was holding a set of keys. She wasn't the trembling waitress. She wasn't the terrified prop. She wore a sharp, dark suit, her hair pulled back, and her eyes held an authority that matched his. "I think I prefer the light." Michael looked at her, and for the first time, there was no calculation in his eyes, only a deep, profound respect. He didn't offer to take the keys. He didn't offer to open the door. He just stood back. Melanie turned, put the key in the lock, and opened the door to her father's shop. She had reshaped the Gambino empire not as Michael's girlfriend, not as his wife, but as a woman who had earned her own power, built on the ashes of her past. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, You're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.